The 93rd Sports Lounge on the air. Travis Kriens in the blue shirt. Charlie Hildebrand in the black shirt. Florida State, what do we got today?
Yeah, well, we're starting like 12 minutes later than usual because we're doing our Florida State impression where we're going to show up late and act like nothing happened and just say, "Yep, business as usual." Don't worry about the beginning. That's in the past. All that matters is the end. We're going to turn it on late.
We'll start there since I do like that. I am on Hawaii time where it was a big win for the Rainbows yesterday, or early this morning, I should say. And we're going Dust v. Dallas Mavericks with the old hat. With the old hat there. And as we want to mention, just because we can, we want to go this one here. Clemson Tigers. Go Tigers since 1889. So supporting the local teams as we usually do. You got the college football playoff. Was this about the most boring sports week that we've had in quite some time? There's really nothing that jumps off the page that you would say, yeah, we got to talk about this. We got to discuss this. I thought this was a pretty quiet week with sports.
I would agree. I don't remember which week it was. It wasn't the opening week of college football, but it was like week 3 or 4, I think. There just weren't many good games on one of those weeks, and I would say it's been like that. I mean, with the difference being, I guess, that back in September, there was at least the playoff hunt in baseball going on, where now, I mean, there certainly is NBA, but it's early enough in the year that, you can certainly rebound from any deficit, except if you're the 76ers.
Florida State, again, I have a feeling about Florida State that they're not one of the 4 best teams. If they are undefeated, they will get into the playoffs, no matter if they win their last 2 games by the same field goal margin that they did versus Boston College at home on a wet Saturday night. So they'll get in. Florida State, do you think they're one of the 4 best teams in the country? Let's start there.
I think ultimately I would say probably not. And then we can get into the discussion of, deserve or the best, and that's a different thing. But in terms of just kind of like the eye test and how things look and the results based off their schedule, I would say they probably are not. With the one caveat, though, that if it's within 10 points in the fourth quarter and Winston's playing, I think it's going to be really tough to beat him because he just always finds a way, like those old school NBA Jam and NBA Blitz games where you get way up and then computer says, "Nope, you crossed the point. We're coming back now. You got up too much." It's kind of like that with Winston, it seems like, where it's just the computer says, "Yep, you did it. Now it's done."
There's nothing in your power that you can do to overtake the power of one Jameis Winston. It was, you look at that schedule. You looked last week, the Miami game. Okay, this is, the point spread was like a point or 2, and people were thinking, on the road, this is going to be a close game, and it was. And this Boston College game, nobody was talking about it to begin the week because it's Boston College, for God's sakes, and it's at home, and you should win. But by the time you get to the third quarter and the thing is so close and Boston College ties it up, then you're thinking, okay, I gotta watch this game, I gotta finish this, see what happens. And Boston College, they lose by a field. Because people were talking about, what happens if a 1-loss or a 2-loss team from this conference, do they get in versus an undefeated team from this conference? And you had said point blank, which is 100% true, if you're in one of the top in the Power 5 conferences and you go undefeated, you will make the playoff, which is what's going to happen here. But then we got into the discussion of, are they one of the 4 best teams? We both say no. Will they make the playoff? I think we both agree that they will if they don't lose. So how should the committee view this? I would probably get a lot of shit if they left them out. But I think it's very clear that Alabama and Oregon are playing the best right now. They're the 2 best teams. You got those 2 Big 12 teams. You got Mississippi State. You got Ohio State. Playing well, they struggled versus Indiana at home. That's not good. Would they get a lot of shit if they left Florida State out?
I think they really would. And I think that's something that, if they stay at 4, I mean, let's hypothetically say they're just going to stay at 4 teams for the next 40 years. That's probably not going to happen. But hypothetically, if they were going to stay at 4, I think that's something you could do, leaving out a Power 5 team after a while, when everyone kind of knows how the system works. I think that's a really bad idea in year 1.
It sets a bad precedent. It sets a bad precedent going forward.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think, and the weird thing is that I think Florida State, I want to give them some credit for trying to schedule teams outside of the conference, but all the teams they beat that looked good at one point or another just keep losing, and it just doesn't look good anymore. I mean, I guess Louisville's their best win now, who 2 weeks ago looked really bad. Now they at least look okay again. Clemson's fallen off a cliff. Part of that's their quarterback getting hurt, but either way, they've still lost and not played well. Notre Dame doesn't look any good at all right now. And it's just kind of in a point where it's like, this could be, I mean, it depends what happens, but we could see that, Florida State is second or third in the college football committee as the only team undefeated, other than Marshall, who won't get in, but maybe doesn't have any wins over anyone ranked in the top 30 either, which would be very, very odd.
Can you hear me?
It was doing the cutting in and out thing.
Okay,
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, would you say that the ACC is the worst of the Power 5 conferences? Would you rate them the 5th best conference in the country?
I would, and I think it's been that way for a couple months. I think you can certainly make the case. The ACC and the Big Ten, I think, are the 2 worst. I think you can say that if you combine the 2 conferences, all 28 teams, I guess. Weird that there's 14 in each of them now. But I think Florida State might be the best, but I think the Big Ten probably has the 2 or 3 next best after that.
So I don't think it's as ridiculous as some people may say to leave Florida State out of this thing if you have all these one-loss teams. And if you look at the resume and who you have beaten, all of them will have multiple wins that are better than that Louisville win, which, as you said, appears to be the best right now. Their losses were very, very good losses if you want to go that route. Ole Miss, Alabama, that's looking less and less good as we go on. How do you feel about how things hinge on certain things, like the Mississippi State streak of 3 straight wins doesn't look as good now against the top 10 teams because those teams are in the top 10. The Ole Miss loss doesn't look as good right now. The Notre Dame and Louisville, or the Notre Dame game, doesn't look as good for Florida State. So there's a lot of it's very fluid week to week, where teams, 1 week, well, we have a win over a top 5 team, and the next week, well, we don't have any wins over any top 15 teams. Is that a dangerous thing? Do they put too much stock into that week to week, considering just one game?
I think the thing is you've got to be willing to. I think it's okay with it being a fluid situation, but you have to be willing, to an extent, to wipe the slate clean and start over each week. And the thing that fans of almost everywhere almost always get wrong is the panic with what's going on right now, and instead of kind of looking towards the future and how things go, because a lot of this is still going to take care of itself anyways. And I think like the best example of that I can think of would be like at the start of the year, even with a whole bunch of new starters on offense, people thought LSU would be really good. Mm-hmm. They beat Wisconsin, and we're like, yeah, LSU's pretty good. They lost to Mississippi State, and I think they lost to Auburn really bad. And everyone's like, well, LSU's not good. And then they beat Ole Miss, and I think they beat someone else, and we were like, oh, nope, LSU's really good again. And then they lose to Arkansas, and we're like, oh, nope, maybe they're not good after all. And I think part of it is that I think the committee's not doing themselves favors by releasing the rankings every week. I think to help them, the best thing I think would have been to not release any at all till the end of the year. If you wanted to release some, I think like they should have done one in October and like one in November and just been like, that's kind of how things are right now. And then not keep doing it. Because, like you said, when you do it each week, whenever somebody loses, it's instantly going to look like a worse win because all of a sudden they've got a loss and they typically are going to drop in the rankings. So just because you beat someone that's ranked 9, they're not going to be ranked 9 after you beat them. And they could win and move up and get back to the point where all of a sudden that looks like a really good win again. But it's just kind of, it seems like people on both sides are kind of dealing with that and, everyone trying to understand how this works. Florida State fans are freaking out because they beat someone that's ranked, and then after they beat them, they're not ranked anymore, and they think that's not fair. And SEC fans are saying, oh, well, we beat this team that's ranked now, and it's like, well, they're ranked higher now because they just played, Samford or Charleston Southern last week and stuff like that.
Is this an ESPN decision to have this poll every week since they own the rights to broadcast these playoff games and they're showing this selection show every Tuesday? They want to drum up interest because I've heard a lot of talk that this is a TV show that they want people to talk about college football during the week on Wednesday. Is that true, or does this need to happen, or at least in the rankings every week?
That's a good question. I don't know if ESPN or the College Football Playoff Committee ultimately gets to decide whether they do the rankings each week. Certainly ESPN decides what they're going to air on TV and what they're not. My assumption would be is that the College Football Playoff is saying we're going to do this each week to try to be transparent, like how politicians always say. And then ESPN saying, well, okay, if you're going to do that, clearly, since we own the rights, we're going to broadcast this and try to make a boatload of money off of it. And I have no clue if they're getting good ratings off of it or not.
Would you expect this to change in coming years?
It wouldn't surprise me if it did. I mean, we're all in kind of a wait-and-see mode just because we don't know how this is going to work, because ultimately none of this really matters until we know who conference champions are going to be. Ohio State might get in if they win the Big Ten. If they lose to Wisconsin or Minnesota in the Big Ten title game, clearly they're not going to get in the playoffs. And when we get a few of these answered, especially like with the SEC, and if anyone in the Big 12, if TCU or Baylor stumble, then we'll know more. So I think after, but I think like maybe, a year or 2 or 3 years, if they're still at 4, and we get a pretty good idea of what they look at, then it wouldn't surprise me if they quit releasing them every week. But that's just me speculating.
The SEC, this was their week where they played their FCS opponents. Not a very good week, but the one SEC game, Missouri-Tennessee, that came down an 8-point game there at Tennessee. Missouri wins, still on track to win the East. Then you had Ole Miss for the second consecutive week. Arkansas wins. Didn't win a game for 2 years in the conference. Back-to-back weeks, they shut out LSU. Now they shut out Ole Miss. Probably the 2 worst offenses, with apologies to Vanderbilt, in the conference between LSU and Ole Miss. So Arkansas, they'll go to a bowl game, but that Ole Miss defense was what carried them throughout the year. Bo Wallace got hurt. Really didn't matter. He came back later on. But unlike Florida State, which can get down 2 or 3 touchdowns, and they've shown they can come back, Ole Miss is a team, if they get down by more than 14 points, game's done, I believe.
I agree with that. I think they're just kind of set up like a team from like the 70s or 80s, just in the way they do stuff. And part of that's just, I think, that they don't have great I don't know if it's that they don't have great talent on offense, or they're just guys that aren't doing what they're comfortable with. But like you said, certainly they don't score very well. And if they get down by more than 7 or 10, it's really going to be tough to come back. And side note on Arkansas, I don't know if I've ever seen a team not win a conference game for essentially 2 years. And then, like you said, shut out back-to-back teams. And not just that, they were both teams that were ranked in the top 20 at the time they played them, too. So, I mean, this would be like the equivalent in the, 2008 or 9, Baylor being terrible all the time. And then all of a sudden it's like, yep, they shut out Oklahoma and Texas in back-to-back weeks.
They are last at 2-5 in the West. I like my close games, and the argument very easily could be made that Arkansas could have won the SEC, could have won the West, because they lose at Mississippi State by 17-10 2 weeks ago. They lost versus 13. They lost in overtime at home to A&M by a touchdown. So an overtime game, a 1-point loss, and a touchdown loss on the road to the number 1 team at the time in the country. I talked about, the plays, the 3-point, 4-point, 7-point games. This is a team where very easily could have won 1, 2, 3 of those games, didn't win any of them. So ridiculous to say that they're that close, or what's the deal with Arkansas?
I wouldn't say it's ridiculous. You bring up an interesting point. I didn't click on the link to read it, but I saw somewhere on Twitter that, people always ask who'd be favored in Las Vegas, and
Yep.
people in Vegas claim who they think would be. And supposedly they're saying that Arkansas would be favored by 2 points over Florida State right now, which
Really?
just shows you kind of. Now, I didn't click on the thing. I didn't read it. I saw that on Twitter. I can't confirm that that's 100% true, but it's kind of funny when you think about it. I mean, certainly, I guess we would say that Arkansas, and this makes sense because Bielema used to coach at Wisconsin, but they're the SEC version of Wisconsin or Minnesota right now, where they're like, yep, you guys get more talent, but we know exactly who we are and what our identity is, and we don't care. We're just going to keep doing this. I mean, I suppose you would say they're sort of like the kind of weird-looking, chunky kid you went to school with in college that somehow always found a way to get fairly good-looking girlfriends because he just knew what his strengths were and he played to his strengths, didn't let his weaknesses get in the way, and has found a way to get done what he needs to get done. So I guess kudos to Arkansas.
They know what to do, boys. Surprising you said that. Bert, I like to call him Bert Bielema.
I do too.
Big guy, tall guy, has some weight to him, good size. His wife, he overshot his coverage there, I believe. So similar to your analogy, Mr. Bielema living the dream, you could say.
You probably would. He's living the dream a lot better now than he was last year when they finished 2-10 or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah, they're going to go to a bowl game now. I don't know who they're going to play. Good chance they'll beat whoever they play just because they're going to try to out-physical them. And I think there's certainly some teams in the country that could deal with that, but not a whole lot of them. So, we'll see. It'll be interesting.
With the Thanksgiving week, one of the great weeks, 3-4 day stretches in sports. With the games on Thursday, you got the college basketball tournaments if you enjoy those going on throughout the holiday weekend. Then you got those Friday college games, and you got the Saturday college games, and really conference titles are decided or who's going to go to the conference title games. And you got Arkansas at Missouri, 1:30 on a Friday on CBS. So that's a game on Friday that I'm interested in because Missouri wins, they go to the title game in the conference. Arkansas, can they pull it off 3 in a row here? This one on the road.
I mean, they certainly can. I don't know if they will or not, but the way they've played the last 2 weeks, it certainly sounds like they've kind of figured everything out. They say in old school, boxing fights that they used to go 30 rounds, that there'd be times, someone takes a haymaker early and just isn't right for 3 or 4 rounds, back before we knew how bad concussions were. And then, 5 or 6 rounds later, all of a sudden they get things back going again. And I guess maybe that's how Arkansas is. I don't know. I think certainly Arkansas's looked a lot more impressive the last couple of weeks against better competition than Missouri has.
It is a shame that Marcus Traxler is not here because his Gophers got another big win this week, an upset at Nebraska. 21-7, Nebraska was up early, and that blocked field goal. What happened to the Nebraska offense after that?
That's a really good question. They were sort of running it okay, but not great, and then they were throwing it a while in the first half, and then in the second half they ran it. I remember 15 or 16 plays in a row, and had a 2nd and 1, and went play action and got sacked, and that was kind of their second to last real drive till the last one where they turned it over at the end. And it was very weird. Minnesota, like I said, they know what they do well and do what they do well pretty well, and so they play fundamentally sound. I don't know what has gone on with Nebraska. Certainly, if you have a quarterback that doesn't throw it very well, that can make what you're trying to do a lot more difficult.
You and Traxler had a discussion last night in the chat. I posted it to the blog, sportsloungeblog.tumblr.com. A good back and forth. He asked you your thoughts on Nebraska and the annual Bo Pelini. Should he stay or should he go? And then that evolved into a discussion about the Big Ten in general. Does anything change with Nebraska? You kind of think they've plateaued, 9-10 wins a season for the last 20 years, it seems. Should anything be done? Because, I just think of Frank Solich, and 9 wins wasn't good enough. They were still clinging to those, the 01 national title contender in the 90s. Bo Pelini, is it safe to stay with him, or should they go shopping, depending on who is out there?
I think the interesting thing is that's what it comes down to. If you're a Nebraska fan, is if you want to do the safe route and keep Bo and go 9-4 or 10-4 each year, and sometimes compete for conference titles. They haven't won any, but they have played in 3 conference title games. Or if you want to take the chance of firing them, where you could be better and you could be worse. And we've seen in college football where teams think they should be better and fire guys, and it horribly backfires. And we've also seen it where it works too, where Florida fired Ron Zook and got Urban Meyer, and Auburn fired Gene Chizik just 2 years after he won a national title and got Gus Malzahn. So I think ultimately you got to find a guy that's the right fit for the school, and each school's a little bit different. And I think if you can find the right guy who's a good fit, you probably would want to make a change. But the thing is you got to find the right guy. And Nebraska's athletic director, I guess, doesn't ever talk about sports during that sports season. So, it's ultimately his decision, and I guess nobody really knows what he thinks about this because he just doesn't comment about football during football season.
Is there a guy that piques your interest at all?
I think it's unlikely Nebraska could get a Power 5 coach to go to Nebraska, at least not someone you'd want. They could get someone like Tim Beckman from Illinois, but no, I don't think they want him.
No.
I think maybe the guy I'm blanking on his name, McElwain, the Colorado State guy. Yeah, who was the offensive coordinator at Alabama, was part of 2 national titles. Colorado State was really bad when he took the job over. And I don't think they were great his first year, but I think they were better than they had been and went 4-8 or something like that. And went to a bowl game last year, beat Washington State in that kind of weird game, whatever the first bowl game of the year is.
New Mexico.
And they look really good this year now. And I don't know if Nebraska will ultimately get them. My guess would be is that teams like Florida and Michigan might want somebody like that too. But I think he's the guy that kind of sticks out of someone that I think they might want and someone they could realistically get, Certainly I think it'd be fun to be like, oh yeah, if you're Nebraska, go get Chip Kelly or Urban Meyer, but I'm pretty sure those guys aren't leaving their respective jobs.
I don't know if this probably wouldn't change on a year-to-year basis, so I don't know if it'd be a good idea, but the Charlie Hildebrand ranking of best jobs in America, where do you put Nebraska? You would assume Alabama would be high up there. What's the Hildebrand ranking right now, Nebraska related and nationally?
I think Nebraska is still a good job, that you could get a lot of guys to go there, but it's not It's not one. I think it's somewhere between like 20 and 30. It's a pretty good job. If you get a good guy, it's a good enough job that he could stay there for a long time and not leave to go somewhere else, except maybe the NFL, because there's always guys that want to go to the NFL. But there's the two things that always hold it back are the cold weather, because it's tough to get kids from the south or the coasts where it's warm to go there. That's something you can overcome, but there's some kids that won't want to go there just because of that. And the big problem is the low population, where, you know, it's easiest to recruit kids in your own state. And Nebraska, I looked it up, I think they're the 39th largest state in the country. And Nebraska and West Virginia are the two smallest states that have a Power 5 team in them.
There you go.
So, I mean, like, Wyoming's smaller, but Wyoming's not a Power 5 team. And I think it's something you can overcome with the right coach who recruits well, but it's something that keeps it from being a job like Alabama or Florida and USC. Since in America we like describing everything, like comparing it to baseball, I would say the Nebraska job is like Adam Dunn or Reggie Jackson, where they're great at hitting for power. They're good enough at fielding in the outfield that they're not necessarily a detriment, but they're not going to hit for average. They're not going to run bases. They're going to walk a lot, but they're going to strike out a lot too. And if you put them in good situations with the right guys around them, they can be really good. If you just say, hey, figure this out, it might not work as well. And I think, like, ultimately, I would say that generally the three best jobs would probably be like USC, Texas, and either Florida or Florida State, because they're the three biggest programs in the three best states for high school recruiting. And they're all warm weather states, and they have all had success both, you know, over the last 30 years and in the last 10 years. And they are your 5-tool players like Mickey Mantle or or Mike Trout or Willie Mays, guys that can just be like, yep, we can do everything.
I like the comparison of baseball players to college football teams. I think that is a good discussion that we could have. That's pretty.
If we work on that, we could probably come up with a pretty good blog post about that.
Very good. Like Babe Ruth was like Notre Dame pre-1960. It's like they were it. There was nobody that could touch them. That was it. And Army Navy's like your Ty Cobbs and your guys way back when.
I would say Arkansas is like Randy Johnson right now. That they're really good at what they do, but if you want them to hit, not going to work. Can't hit.
If you want to throw a fastball,
actually, I should compare Arkansas. It'd be better, I guess, I should compare Arkansas to like Frank Thomas. It's like, yep, they can hit well, can't field, can't run, get hurt a lot of times, but they can hit pretty well.
If you want to play second base, not going to work. So.
Yeah, not going to work at all.
No. The team that I like to call the Florida State of the Big Ten, Ohio State. A lot of people like them. But another game this week where they're at home against, if you want to say they're the worst team in the Big Ten, you can probably make that argument. Indiana, 21-20 at the start of the fourth quarter, and they spread out the lead here. They were up by 22 late in the game. They ultimately win 42-27, but that game was way closer than it had any right to be, especially first 7 minutes. They scored 2 touchdowns right away. They get up 14-0. A lot of people are talking about Ohio State, and if they win the conference, where does that put them? I don't think they should get in, because if you look at it, whoever they beat, looks like it's going to be Wisconsin, who they're going to play in the Big Ten title game, and you could make the argument last week that a Mississippi State win versus Ole Miss would be better than a Ohio State win versus Wisconsin. That still might be the case, but we have to wait here a couple more weeks. So I do not see Ohio State jumping anybody because they beat Wisconsin. Is Wisconsin a good enough win to jump teams?
I don't know if it will be. I think Ohio State had an opportunity, maybe not with the door wide open, but at least open like a crack after TCU played so poorly against Kansas. I think you could sort of explain some of the weirdness of the Minnesota game to it being, you're playing on the road in snow, yada, 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 yada. I think it's really tough to then the next week having them struggle at home against Indiana, who they should have won by 30. I mean,
Yep.
A lot of other teams in the Big Ten who are not as good as Ohio State beat them much, much worse than Ohio State did. And I think that will probably come back to haunt Ohio State, because I think Wisconsin's going to end up moving up in the rankings some, assuming they beat Minnesota, which I think they will. I think, I think it'll be a good win, but I don't think they're going to be able to jump over probably TCU or Baylor. If they would have beat Indiana, 49-10, like people thought they would have, and then if they beat Michigan by 28 and beat Wisconsin by 21, I don't know if they'd get in, but you could at least make a fairly good argument. I think it's a lot tougher with this game against Indiana. And I don't know about you, I was really surprised they didn't beat them. I kind of thought that, Indiana doesn't really have anything to play for right now. Clearly Ohio State does. I thought they were going to try to, make some style points like TCU did against Texas Tech and, maybe not score 80, but I thought they'd try to score 40 or 50. And they really, I guess they scored 42, but they didn't look good in doing it.
They gave up 27. That's too many. It wouldn't it be funny? Yeah. Indiana maybe beats a Big Ten champ in Missouri, maybe beats the Big Ten champ in Ohio State, and they finish like 4-8, and they beat like two of the conference winners. I mean, I don't know how the hell you figure that one out, but you do. Looking at the rushing record, the 7-day rushing record of Melvin Gordon, freshman Samaje Perine from Oklahoma had, I believe, 200 yards the week before. Had another 100-yard performance earlier in the season, but kind of comes out of nowhere with 427 yards on 34 carries, 5 touchdowns, 12.5 a clip. And again, he's another guy like Gordon. Didn't play the fourth quarter, so he could have, if they wanted to, could have put up 500 yards, a record that stood for 15 years with LaDainian Tomlinson, and then they break it in back-to-back weeks. Cody Thomas, though, Oklahoma quarterback, 3 for 13, 39 yards. It was wet. It was raining very hard. But you would think got to be one of the biggest discrepancies for a non-option team. 510 rushing yards for Oklahoma, 39 passing. My God.
It's pretty gross. And like Perine, the crazy thing is I don't think Perine was technically even the starter. I'm blanking on the guy's name, but someone else started, and I don't know if he got hurt or Perine just played well enough early on. They wanted to keep giving him the carries, but we talked about it some in the chat, but I can't think of a time I've seen something where there's. I get that the single game rushing record is not like the most hallowed of all college football records. I can't think of a time, though, where I've seen, you see a record that's like a really impressive record get broken and then is broken again so quickly. Like, the only thing I can think of, and this is different because it's a career record, and instead of 7 days, it was a whole year, but Ricky Williams set the single season, or the career rushing record in '98 at Texas, and then Ron Dayne turned around and broke it the very next year. But... yeah. Like 7 days later, I don't know if I can think of that in any sport.
This is the only thing I could think of, and it's a 3-year gap, is McGuire hitting 70, and then 3 years later, Bonds hitting 70 for a record that was in 1961, set in 61, and before that it was set in 27. So, 3-year time, performance-enhancing drugs are not a very long period for a home run record, but this is quite ridiculous, yeah.
Yeah, this would have been like when Wilt scored 100 games with the 76ers, like 3 games later.
Somebody else.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar scored 112, and he's like, wait, what?
Whoops. And Gordon,
I don't remember if he might have still been Lou Alcindor back then. I don't remember.
And last week we broke down Melvin Gordon's what he needed to break Barry Sanders' record of 2,628 yards, only in 11 games in 1988 for Oklahoma State. He won't break the games record or yards per game record. Kevin Smith there a few years ago, he was 61 yards shy. Remember, they just kept giving him the ball, I think in a bowl game or whatever it was, trying to break the record, but he was 61 yards short. So Gordon, he got his 190, 200 yards, which if he does that every week, he will break the record. Has Minnesota next week. You win there. You have to win that to break the record. Then you got Ohio State, and then you got a bowl game. 3 games left, 500 so yards away. Better chance than last week, or same amount of chance?
I think I give him a little better chance now after yesterday. I thought, technically, in terms of how far he dropped from 408 to 195 or whatever, percentage-wise, that's a huge drop. But in terms of, realistic how well he did, he still had a fantastic game. I didn't think he'd play as well as he did. I thought he'd have 120 yards, and I was certainly wrong there. I don't know if he will break it or not. One thing I don't like is that in 2001 or 2, the NCAA started adding bowl games to these records, but they've never gone back and added bowl games to the old ones. So Barry Sanders, who ran for 2,600 yards or whatever, it should actually be 2,800 yards in 12 games. But for some reason, they don't want to go back and change that. Either way, if Gordon breaks it, it's still one of the 2 best rushing seasons ever. Because I think it was Kevin Smith from Central Florida. That was before. Yeah, I think they were in Conference USA then, which, it's not a bad conference, but certainly there's a difference between Conference USA and doing it in the Big 10 or the Big 12. And he did it in I guess Gordon will have 14 games too, so the game difference is different. But certainly Gordon's done it in a more exciting way of breaking off 70-yard touchdown runs instead of doing it with 38 carries, getting 6 yards a carry.
He needs about 175 yards a game these last 3. Definitely doable for him. So that's something to keep track of. Wisconsin, probably a New Year's Eve, New Year's Day bowl game.
I didn't think that they would, or that he'd be able to do that well against Ohio State. But after seeing that, Coleman was still busting off 90-yard touchdown runs, I'm not as convinced now that all of a sudden Ohio State's going to be able to. Yeah. I think they'll be able to slow him down better than Nebraska did, but I don't think they're going to be able to be nope, we're going to hold you to 70 yards rushing either.
I enjoy the NCAA basketball tournament, the selection show, the brackets, all that. I also do you enjoy as much the bowl selection, the anticipation of the bowl games coming up here in 2 weeks?
I've noticed there's a pretty strong correlation that I care about it more depending on how well Nebraska's doing that year, which is a huge surprise. So I will not care quite as much about it this year. I'm still excited for the 14 playoff to see how that shakes out. But the weird thing, though, is that almost all, not every bowl game, but it used to be almost all of them, you could kind of, figure out who half to 3/4 of them would be, on the Thursday before the last games of the regular season. Because, not every game, but most of the games, you can be okay, well, if this team wins, then clearly they're going to go to the Orange Bowl. But if this team wins, then they might have to go to the Fiesta Bowl instead. But the other thing, I don't know, they're changing things now. I don't know if they're doing this in every conference, but I know, at least in the Big Ten, it used to be that for every conference, whatever bowl game gets to pick in the order they do. Not that, after the BCS bowl games, the Capital One Bowl was always first in the Big Ten. Not that the Capital One Bowl would have to take the best team left, but they got the choice, the first choice of who was left, and then they would usually take the best team record-wise. But I guess in the Big Ten, they've changed it to, they are saying to the bowl games, you write down the 3 teams from our conference you would really like to see, and then we will take your 3 teams into consideration and tell you which team's going there.
Really?
So supposedly that's what they're doing in the Big Ten, at least. I don't know if they're doing that in the other Power 5 conferences. I guess they're doing it because they don't want teams I know Nebraska played in the Capital One Bowl 2 years in a row. I guess they don't want to do that. I don't know if this will end up being good, bad, or irrelevant, but it's at least interesting. And it could be that now, all of a sudden, maybe we will not have as good of a picture of who will go there until they announce it.
The thing that I understand that they're going to do is, you have to pick a certain different number of teams in a 10-year stretch. You have to pick at least 5 or 6 different Big Ten teams so we don't get stuck with certain teams in certain spots every single year for a bowl game. So I enjoy that it shakes it up a little bit so you don't have the same teams going to the same bowl games. That's
yeah, and I get that aspect. Yeah, and I know I read that with the Big Ten too. I mean, who knows how the conference will shake out over the next 5 years, but if we just make the assumption that Ohio State and Michigan State are the 2 best teams and play in the big important games, then every year you're saying, well, the Capital One Bowl is either going to get like Wisconsin or Nebraska. That certainly, if it was just those 2 teams, that would get boring, and teams don't want to go to the same place, and fans don't want to go. So I get it from that aspect. I think the only thing I would not want to see would be something where they were like, well, we can't take Ohio State or Michigan State, and the 3 best teams are Nebraska, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, who have all been to this bowl in the last 3 years. So I guess we've got to take 7 and 5 Northwestern, and they get to lose to Ole Miss by 75 points then.
Now it's fun for everybody.
Yep.
Like last week, I expected the 4 teams that are in the playoff last week to be there at the end. I expect it to be the 2 SEC schools, Florida State and Oregon. I think that's your playoff. Do you think they will drop Florida State to 4 so that we do not get an Alabama Mississippi State rematch? Do you think they drop Alabama to 2 so we can have Oregon Mississippi State or Alabama Florida State? So we do not get an Alabama-Mississippi State rematch, which is something that I'm not looking forward to if that were to happen. Would you see that as a possibility to have that more fresh matchups in the playoff?
In theory, they're not going to rank teams to do that. They're going to do it in terms of who they think are the best. I don't know if it'll work out that way. Having said that, my guess would be is that they will bite the bullet and have Alabama and Mississippi State play in the first round. So that way they can guarantee they won't get a rematch in the national title game. I don't know if that would be the correct thing to do or not, but that would be my guess because you might not get great ratings, but I think it would be easier to watch it as a semifinal than as the title game.
Because I think Mississippi State, if they make it, they're losing to whoever they play in that first round.
Yeah, you might be right. I mean, certainly I don't think they're going to beat Alabama. I don't know. I kind of look at like Oregon as like the less rivals team of Florida State. I mean, that they're similar in some ways, but they have less guys that are going to go on to be future first-round draft picks. But they've got a quarterback that when he gets rolling, there's just like almost nothing you can do to stop him. I think Alabama would beat Mississippi State, and I guess I would probably agree with you. I think Mariota or Winston, if they get on against Mississippi State, I don't think Mississippi State would be able to beat them.
I liken the Florida State run here being similar to, I don't know if you want to call it like a Ric Flair or somebody like that has a title, and it's a long build, like a year-long build of they're the champ, and guys get so close, and like Ric Flair will have the 4 horsemen run in and cause a DQ. He wins the title. He keeps the title for another day. Florida State doing the same thing here, avoiding elimination, overtime games, goal line stands, field goals made, field goals missed at the end, doing whatever they can to eke by, and they could have lost to Miami or Louisville or Notre Dame or Boston College. Is it going to be even sweeter to lose to an Oregon or an Alabama in the semifinal or the national championship? Is it better to lose at the WrestleMania rather than just a July pay-per-view, so to speak? Is the build-up good?
Quick side note, I liked your Ric Flair example. If you remember, I would use I think it was when Triple H and Stephanie McMahon took over the WWF before they switched it to WWE, and like every pay-per-view was Triple H against either The Rock or Mick Foley, and Triple H won like every time. I don't know how long he had it because I didn't follow it that whole time, but it seemed like he was the heavyweight champion for like a year and a half or something like that.
And
go ahead.
He would just squeak it out no matter what. interference, whatever he could do. And then one day somebody would, like a Batista. I know a Batista main evented a WrestleMania with him, knocked him off. That was a big deal. Finally, somebody won. Will Oregon or Alabama be the Batista of this college football season?
I think there's a good chance, and like in terms of what you were saying of when's it better to lose, I think you're better off losing in the big game, assuming. I mean, this is assuming that this isn't like a 70-point blowout, but assuming it's a regular close game, I think you're better off losing in the really big important game, and at least being remembered for getting there, than being the team that doesn't play in that game. Loses the heartbreaking game in October, and you're Florida State, and you beat, like Ole Miss in the Orange Bowl when it's like interesting, but nobody cares as much. Or like you said, the equivalent of winning at like SummerSlam or TLC or something.
Duke really shit the bed versus Traxxas Tar Heels, 45-20.
They really did.
I mean, they were in line. If they win their last two, they win the Coastal, and they get another chance at Florida State. But it's going to be Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech with the option. Very, a two-loss team here, 9-2. The big game versus Georgia. I think that's one of the more underrated rivalries. I mean, these motherfuckers hate each other. Georgia Tech. I worked with a guy in Nashville from Georgia Tech. They hate Georgia. So I think that's a solid rivalry there. So that's another good rivalry game to look forward to this weekend. Yeah.
Is Georgia Tech? I forget. What's the nickname for that? Is it clean old-fashioned hate, or is it the Deep South's oldest rivalry?
I would say the first one sounds.
It's one of those two. Certainly they hate each other. I think this is usually, to me at least, this is the best way to prove if something's a rivalry or not. If they say, okay, here's your choice. Would you rather lose to this team that's your rival and then go on to win the conference, or beat your rival and not win the conference? And if they say, screw that, I'm not losing to that team, I'm beating them, I don't care about the conference, then it's a deep-seated, hated rivalry.
Clean, old-fashioned hate.
Yeah, they really don't like each other. And I guess some of it might be, I've not ever been to Georgia before, but I guess demographic-wise, the stereotypes are that Georgia is the
everyman,
the party school, and the popular kids go there, and they're usually they're better than Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech's where the smart guys that are kind of nerdy and awkward around people sometimes go. I don't know if that's true or not, but I've heard people who don't have a dog in either fight kind of describe it that way. And it seems like in a lot of rivalries where they hate each other, there's usually a difference between the two schools a lot of the time. One's more the ag school, and the school that's not makes fun of them for that and stuff like that. Either way, the teams really, really, really hate each other. They've got to hate each other when it's their last regular season game and it's not a conference game.
And Georgia still has that SEC title on the line this game, obviously. Out of conference doesn't matter, but they would like to go into that game playing well. Next week, you got the Thursday, the Friday, the Saturday games. That's a lot of fun. TCU at Texas on Thursday night. It would behoove the Frogs here to play well. Because Traxxas mentioned it about a month ago. I said go to hell. They're going to shit-pound Texas. The Kansas game doesn't give you a good feeling. Two different teams. So it would be nice to see them put the boots to Texas, who they have been playing better, but I still do not like their quarterback. He sucks, and their offense is quite terrible.
I think that, if you're TCU, you certainly want to kind of try to end that game with an exclamation point and beat them handily. I think TCU's going to win. I like what Charlie Strong's doing defensively. I think they've improved enough throughout the year that they could kind of, make it a sloppy defense game. Now, if they do that, their offense is bad enough that TCU could still win 21-6 in a game that's not as close as the score indicates. But I think Texas has the capability of making it close. But Even with the poor game against Kansas, I think I'm back on I think TCU is going to win handily against Texas bandwagon. I forget which I'm jumping on and off all sorts of bandwagons. I forget which one I'm on sometimes.
You can be on multiples.
Yeah.
Friday, some good games Friday afternoon. West Coast team, so you can watch them during the day. 2:30 kickoffs, Stanford at UCLA. And you got Arizona State at Arizona, big-time implications as far as the Pac-12 title game is concerned there. Thoughts about those games? UCLA seems to be playing pretty well now after struggling early on. And would it be nice for these Pac-12 teams to move their games up to 6, 7 o'clock Eastern Central Time so that we can see them? We got a chance to see USC, UCLA, and UCLA looked really good in the second half.
It would be nice if they did it more often. I mean, I get that, you're on the West Coast and it's 2 hours later than Central Time where we are, and 3 hours earlier than East Coast time. So, I mean, I certainly get that if you want to have the one late game because there's no other games on then, and you can get that whole timeshare to yourself almost, especially on the West Coast. But I feel like they've had a lot of good games that have gone late and kind of wish they wouldn't do that. I don't know. Maybe they're trying to get a real corner on the Australian and Chinese TV audience, and that's why they play at that time. But, I mean, like you said, I think it's a couple of pretty good games. I think Arizona and Arizona State, to me is bigger just because they both could still win the Pac-12 South. Well, clearly Stanford can't, but is good enough to still beat UCLA. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I'm more interested in Arizona and Arizona State because they've both been really good this year. They've both been good at times in the last 15 or 20 years, but very rarely at the same time. And, you still got a chance to win the conference. I don't think either of them would beat Oregon, but it could be interesting. And, I kind of feel bad for Arizona because they beat Oregon. Nobody cared. They were like, whatever, you're still not any good. I'm trying to remember who they lost to. I think they lost to Utah and USC maybe. I don't remember. But whoever they lost to, they were like, yep, they're not any good. And they just kind of keep winning. I mean, this is a team that could still beat Arizona State and Oregon and finish the regular season at 11-2, which would be pretty good no matter how you spin it. And certainly, I'm sure Rich Rodriguez is happy that he can do what he wants in Arizona as opposed to in Michigan where he got ran out of town. And Arizona State's been pretty good. I mean, they shouldn't have lost to Oregon State, but I don't know. I'm just excited to watch that game. I usually, like in a lot of games, I can watch, and there's one team I either don't like for some reason or one team I just like more and end up hoping they win. And I don't have anything against either of the two Arizona teams, and I like watching, team or games where both teams are good, and I don't really care who wins. I think that's fun.
It's like a lot of bowl games. It's like a lot of bowl games.
Yep, very true.
I give no shits who wins this game. Just hope the team that I picked in the pick'em for 35 points wins. So, which a side note, where apparently this is the last week of the college pick'em, which is disappointing because I thought last year we did pick conference title games. I'm just
2 years conference title games. They're not doing that this year.
According to this, week 13 and 14. Week 14 is next week, and this is the end. So quite disappointing there. I don't know why they're not going a full slate of games in 2 weeks here. So that kind of sucks. We got a guy beardless. He has run away with this thing in the last couple of weeks as everybody has struggled, and I believe he's going to win unless he just doesn't make his picks. He's in the 98th percentile.
Yeah, he's the golfer at the British Open that just kind of he shoots like 68 each day and wins. He didn't have any 63s, but he didn't have any 74s either. He's just kind of been consistent. I know I had that week a couple weeks ago that was just awful and was only marginally better this week. And it seems like a lot of other people had the same problem. And if you can, you bring your – it's a marathon, not a sprint. You bring your B-plus pick each week. As long as you don't have any C or D games, you can do pretty well.
Mr. Rahman had 11 points this past week. A poor performance by him. You mentioned 6 points 2 weeks ago for you. I think this college pick'em season will be remembered for a long, long time. unbelievably difficult for whatever reason. And
it certainly doesn't help when you want to pick Florida State for 9, but accidentally pick Miami for 9 instead.
That would have been a game changer for you. That could have been a 15, 20-point turnaround for you. If we give you those points, you would be tied for second with Mr. Dan Beck. So definitely a game changer there. And you get to the point where I'll put Florida State at 10 every week when they're in the thing. And if they win, I get 10 points and I'm happy. And if I lose, and if they lose, I'm even happier yet. So it's one of those win-wins.
The reverse jinx. I like doing the reverse jinx. I've done that all the time with the Dolphins in the pigskin pick'em thing that I'm doing dreadfully bad in this year.
Yeah, the pick'em also more tightly contested because you don't have the points, but and the bowl pick'em coming up. It'll be interesting to see how the bowl pick'em unfolds with these new playoff games. See if they have an open spot there, which I assume there will be for a national championship that is still undecided. But Mr. Amon pulling away. He's up by 7 right now in the pigskin pick'em, the NFL pick'em, with Mr. Schottenkirk and Mr. Stacken tied at second, 7 points behind. So Mr. Amon, if he as long as he has internet in the Denver area, has a pretty good chance here with 5 weeks to go. So I believe Mr. Schottenkirk won it last year. Mr. Amon, a tip of the hat to you. Looking pretty good right now. So
kudos to him. He's done really well in that, and he's done a lot better in the college pick'em because he hasn't skipped any weeks.
That's
like
right.
He kept doing.
Thumbs up for Mr. Amon for getting your picks in. That's much appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, a 19's not very good, but a 19's a heck of a lot better than a 0.
And Stacken's not going to jump anybody that picked the entire week, which was kind of my hope and dream, that he would somehow miss a week and yet jump somebody. But that has not happened. But a boatload of really good college football games here. Georgia Tech, Georgia, that's your early game SEC network if you can find that. Michigan, Ohio State, see if the last run here, very, very likely Brady Hoke's final game as a Michigan man. That's your early slate. The afternoon at 2:30, Florida State, the last game for Mr. Muschamp, the lounge favorite. Mississippi State, Ole Miss at 2:30 as well. Baylor, Texas Tech. So those are some really good games. Minnesota, Wisconsin. So you've got 4 really good games, 2:30 on a Saturday. And then the nightcap, you got Auburn and Alabama. If Ole Miss wins against Mississippi State, that Alabama-Auburn game kind of becomes meaningless as far as the West goes. Mississippi State, if they win, they're still alive. If Mississippi State loses, they're gone, they're done, and Ole Miss would clinch. Then you also have Oregon at Oregon State at 7 p.m. on ABC. So any of those games, because this was past Saturday, not very good. This week, tons of games, a dozen games that are good.
Yeah, I think this week more than makes up for it. I mean, first off, I would say with the Iron Bowl, let's all hope it's a good game. There's no way it's going to be as good of a game as it was last year, nor will it probably ever be as good of a game as it was last year. But I'm interested in that. I'm interested in Georgia Tech. I think it's always interesting to see Georgia Tech play a team that's good when they are good, just because of the contrast in styles is usually so different, and it's just really tough to stop. I mean, you can prepare for the triple option in a month, and that's usually why Georgia Tech does really bad in bowl games. But in a week, it's really tough to get ready for. And I think, I'm sort of interested in Minnesota and Wisconsin because Minnesota can technically still win the division. I don't think they will. If that gets out of hand early, I will quit caring about that. But, I could see Jerry Kill finding a way to ugly the game up and keep it close and low scoring. I don't know. This is probably wishful thinking on my part, but the way things have gone this year, I would not be shocked if Florida finds a way to sort of have it be a close game with Florida State for a while. Mentioned it in the chat, the last team to beat Florida State was the Will Muschamp-led Florida Gators team in 2012. I think it would be very funny that Will Muschamp beats Florida State back when they went on to go to the Sugar Bowl and then lose to Louisville, has 2 very poor seasons after that, and then beats Florida State on the way out the door getting fired, and makes some joke to Jimbo about how, he wins just as often as he does in those games or something. I don't know. I think it'd be funny. I tend to kind of try to be sort of like even-keeled with a lot of things. I'm really looking forward to the day Florida State loses, though.
It's coming up very soon because, as we said in the preview, I think Nebraska is the only team in the last 40, 45 years to go undefeated 2 years in a row. So Florida State history is not on their side. Despite saying that I think the playoff will be exactly like it is right now in 2 weeks, I'll hedge my bets the other way. And the one surprise that I'll give you is I think Ole Miss beats Mississippi State this week.
Yeah, I mean, I could certainly see it happening. The Egg Bowl, I wouldn't put that as the be-all, end-all, throw out the records rivalry game, but it's certainly one where weird things have happened in the past. And, they play pretty good defensively at Ole Miss for the most part. I mean, they gave up a lot of points last week. Some of that was the offense's fault. But, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I kind of like watching Mississippi State do well and win, but I get the sense there's another loss coming here.
I think Prescott has got 10 interceptions. I mean, it's not a ton. It's about 1 a game, but for a Heisman winner, you don't see many Heisman candidates have close to double-digit turnovers or interceptions. So I think you had maybe said that you kind of expect one more big upset maybe to shake some things up.
I still do.
You don't know where it's
coming from. There's less games.
Yeah,
there's less games when they get to conference title week, but certainly those games you have maybe even more potential for upset, maybe not. But yeah, I think there's something coming, and it might not be anybody in the top 4. It might be Ohio State losing, or I wouldn't consider Stanford beating UCLA the huge one, but I guess
Charlie Hildebrand, I believe, has left us, talking about he thinks there's one more upset left to go. Nathan Stacken has texted and said that he may join the program. We'll see if Charlie Hildebrand can come back as well. But as we mentioned, plenty of good college football games coming up on the Thursday, Friday, and Saturday in preparation for the conference title games in 2 weeks' time. Wanted to mention some NFL discussion as well. Nothing really noteworthy today. I had Miami and Denver play a pretty entertaining game. Miami lost that one 39-36 after being ahead for a large majority of the first 3 quarters. Miami's defense looked really good early on, but Denver and Peyton Manning did them in there, scoring close to 40 points. The NFC South continues to suck very, 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 very badly. Tampa Bay lost as expected to Chicago, so they go to 2-9. You had Atlanta lose at home on the last-second field goal to Cleveland. So Cleveland continues their hot run, in Atlanta, the division leader, coming into the day at 4-6. They dropped to 4-7, and Cleveland, they continue their roll. They're now at 7-4, tied with Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. Percentage points ahead with their 7-3-1 record. So Cleveland, they continue their hot run as well. You got a boatload of problems in the AFC as far as the playoff picture is concerned, because you got the Colts leading the AFC at 7-4. You got Pittsburgh as the first wild card at 7-4. Kansas City right now at 7-4. The other 7-4 teams that are locked out are San Diego and Cleveland. So plenty of teams still in the hunt. You got Baltimore and New Orleans Monday night at New Orleans. So that's a huge game as far as New Orleans is concerned for the division, and a huge game as well for Baltimore. And Buffalo, they play tomorrow night. Plenty of snow up there. They are still alive at 5-5. and Miami at 6-5, still not out of it yet. So the AFC, similar to last year, they've got a half dozen teams going for about 2 spots, and then in the NFC, it's really quite the opposite. You got about 3 or 4 teams going for those 2 spots, and you have some division races in there as well. With currently, if the playoffs ended today, which they don't, 11 games in with 5 games to go, Seattle, defending Super Bowl champ, would be out, and San Francisco, the fellow team to make the NFC Championship game last year, would also be out, as Dallas and Detroit currently have the final 2 NFC playoff spots. But I expect Detroit to not make the playoffs. Green Bay now a game ahead in that division, and Arizona, they lose today to Seattle on the road. But Seattle is still 2 games back of Arizona. So as long as Drew Stanton and that defense can continue to play well, they can get to 11 or 12 wins. Arizona should be able to get a first-round bye and get that division wrapped up, because they were 9-1, now 9-2. They were a full 3 games ahead of San Francisco and Seattle at the start of the day. Only 2 now, but they have a good 2-game cushion with 5 games left. And Philadelphia, again, with Mark Sanchez, plenty of points on the board, versus Tennessee here this afternoon. So the NFC, you kind of know you can probably figure out 4 or 5 of the playoff teams there. Meanwhile, in the AFC, you really have no idea who's winning the North. You really have no idea who the last 2 playoff teams will be. So we'll see if we can get Mr. Hildebrand back on the show. And Mr. Stacken is he's been out sick the last couple of weeks. He's trying to get hooked up as well. So he's having internet issues in Brookings too. Well, he'll probably miss the show for the 2nd consecutive week. Wrapping up the show, I wanted to mention Carlos Stanton, Giancarlo Stanton's 13-year, $325 million contract with the Florida Marlins, Miami Marlins. 25 years old, can opt out when he's 30 years old. We think that it's, you don't want to give a guy that's 30 years old an 8-10-year contract, like an Albert Pujols with the Angels, with like a Verlander with the Tigers. You don't want to be paying them when they're 36, 37, 38 years old, because production just naturally goes down during those years. With Stanton, he can opt out in 5 years when he's 30 years old, so that kind of gets the Marlins off the hook. If they're not competitive, Stanton can't hit the free agent market again when he's 30, and if he keeps up his current pace, he can still probably get an 8 or 10-year deal worth 250 million yet again. So it's a win-win for Stanton as far as the money is concerned, and for the Marlins, surprising last year, finished near 500. Big things coming in store for the Marlins. They get their star pitcher Jose Fernandez back off of Tommy John. So if he can come back to the form that he had before he was injured, one of the 3-4 best pitchers in all of baseball, then I think Miami, they can be competitive and flirt with the 500 mark yet again next year. As Charlie responds, if you get it working and you want to finish, just text me. Either way, and we'll wrap it up. So plenty of college football. Spent most of the time on the college football, as we usually do. Had some other things on the agenda, but we'll call it a day. Just a little over an hour for the lounge. Mr. Schottenkirk, the worldwide travels of Mr. Schottenkirk in St. Louis as we speak for the 28th annual Survivor Series. The big rumor, I wanted to get Charlie's thoughts on this, but Sting was one of his, one of his more favorite wrestlers as a child. Rumors swirling that he is expected to make his debut in the WWE as a 55, 56-year-old man, never been on a WWE pay-per-view or a television show for that matter, so something to look forward to next week. So with that, for Mr. Hildebrand, for Mr. Stacken, who will miss the show, I am Travis Kriens. Go Mavericks. Go Hawaii. And we'll talk to you next week, the 94th edition of the Sports Lounge.